Hey, why don't we get started? I know more people will be joining us. Thank you all for coming today. My name is Michelle Rapp, and I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Career Strategy in the Office of Alumni Relations. And I host programs like these, and today we have a large student audience, which is fantastic. And we do welcome you to turn on your cameras so we can see each other, and this is going to be a very conversational event. I'm super excited to have Austin Grippo and Danielle Larsen here with us today. They have very interesting stories and career and life paths, and they're here to share from their experiences, answer your questions, and give us insights into what this may mean for you and your direction. So I'm going to start off. We're going to have the speakers introduce themselves, and then we'll move into some questions from me and then open it up to you. And you're welcome to drop questions into the chat. And we really look forward to that interactive part. So I'm going to start off with Danielle, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. And Austin and I are very much looking forward to hearing from you guys and kind of understanding better what you're seeking to kind of learn. A little bit about myself. I did graduate in 2010 from the International Business Program. I was a language minor in Spanish, always with the idea that I would live and work abroad. I spent the better part of the next decade, 9 years living abroad, in Latin America, 6, Mexico, Brazil. I've done India and Slovakia. And then in the last 3 years, I've actually been stateside, doing a bit of a reverse cultural immersion, let's say. And on the personal side, I did meet and marry my husband in Brazil. So we're a multicultural and a multilingual family in current state. So excited and happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks. And Austin.
Yes, thank you, thank you. Absolutely echo Danielle's sentiment there. Thank you guys for having us. Such a pleasure to speak back to Northeastern and actually give back a bit here to a school that's given so much to me. But I guess in the vein of going through sort of how I ended up, I'm currently in France at the moment. But story is a wide one that started with a very lucky childhood. My parents were expats. And similar to Danielle, I went to Northeastern with an ambition to figure out a way through an international career. I graduated with criminology and social sciences and a minor in international business in 2012, but took my career in a million different directions and went through pharmaceutical industry, into the finance industry, and then ultimately into technology. Currently working for Salesforce based in London, helping customers navigate what we all know as agentic AI. So think LLMs and all that craziness you're probably seeing in the news. But excited to be here and help any of you figure out an expat career in your near future.
Fantastic. We wanted to start out too by finding out the interests of the audience. So I do have a quick poll here. So this should work if I did it right as multiple choice, that you can pick any of these answers or multiple answers. And yeah, I am having a little glitch here, which is I'm seeing the poll, but I'm not seeing the launch button. Let me just try this one more time. Let's try one more thing. Okay, here's the launch. Everybody, are you seeing that, everybody? Is that okay?
Yeah, it popped up. Thanks, Michelle.
Good. Yeah.
Are you seeing the results coming through, Michelle? Is that on your side?
Yes, and then let me Okay, so I'm going to share the results here. So we have 75% wanting to work overseas, 13% have, 42% seeking a short-term experience, 58% looking for a long-term move, and 4% who would be making the move with a partner and or children. Thank you.
Can we build on that one too, just to get the if you did answer with you are ambitious to go somewhere in the near term, can you throw in the region or if you're specific about a country? Because Danielle has amazing experiences in so many different regions that I don't. But be really curious if there's anybody that's bold enough to maybe pop in the chat what region you're interested in.
Excellent.
Oh, cool. Spain, London, amazing. Get me on LinkedIn. We'll get you a job.
A lot of EU. Oh, Latam. Okay,
Amazing.
good.
Excellent. And just to put in a plug too, that we have alumni in those locations too, and we can talk about that later. And then there's some actually active alumni communities that gather. So I wanted to ask you both, how did you come to choose this for starters? And then also, how did you actually go about landing a job internationally? How about Austin to start us?
I think the ambition sat like way deep in the subconscious, which was just very lucky to have grown up in the family of an expat. So I grew up, I think I was a little bit under, right around a year moving to London, then we went to Singapore and then Australia. So the world was very, very big for me as a really young person. And I think having that global citizen mindset, as well as the fact my mom is also from Bogota, Colombia. So I was really lucky as well to have that Latin influence. And I just knew that going to an international school where you had that exposure
You just froze for a second, Austin.
with the challenge it presented, I went out very naive to my first job, telling my first boss, I want to go to London. And it definitely took me the better part of 8 years to make it happen. I know, Danielle, you had a different experience, so let you take it from here.
Sure. I guess I'll also give a little bit of context. So my parents were both in the military in the U.S. They married in the Army. And I was actually born on an Army base in Germany. We didn't live abroad for very long, but I also kind of grew up with this consciousness that being abroad was just a really exhilarating experience for my parents. And so I had always had this desire. So that kind of was where it's rooted. And I really applied to the international business program with the intent that I could do a full year abroad, get an international co-op under my belt, and hopefully that would kind of catapult me. And then I was really fortunate. I actually found my first job. I'm in insurance, which is a subsect of finance. At a job fair at Northeastern. They were hiring for Mexico. I had just come back from my year abroad in Mexico. And so I only waited at that table and I got an interview in about a month. And so it just kind of sequentially worked out. I graduated and my visa came in the next month and I was kind of off. And again, I was looking for less of the industry, more of a good fit from the company culture and really just more about like location. So I would have pretty much gone anywhere. And it just worked out that I went back to where I had just come from.
Amazing. And Austin, for you, was it a transfer with the company you'd started working with, or how did you get there?
Yeah, so this is where I'll say transferable skills become your greatest asset. I built a career over 3 industries and then carved out a very niche skill set and then figured out within the market that I wanted to go to how that skill set would map really well to their business priorities. So I would say, think about the world in a very macro lens and build skills that will take you to the places you want to be. It's a hard way to think about it because I think a lot of times in school we're very linear with our thinking. But if you want to become an expat, having that really wide aperture is super important to making sure that you're going to have it's something we talk about a lot. There's EQ, there's IQ, and we don't really talk about AQ, but your agility quotient, your ability to change and adapt quickly is super important. So look up AQ and read a book on it if you haven't yet. It'll be your best friend.
Well, that's a good lead into, I think, a question that's probably obvious, which is, what were some of the challenges that you faced in entering a job and entering life in another country?
Guess I can start with that a little bit. So I
I
would
have
say one of the first things, oh, we're on a delay. Oh, go. Okay. I was going to just share that I think one of the first things is you need a ton of humility. Being abroad and like recognizing that you need to meet people where they are is something that it takes a long time. It requires a lot of self-reflection, a lot of like embracing some constructive feedback. I'll share when I first went to Latin America, I ended up being there for 6 years, but I got a lot of initial feedback that Danielle's too direct of a communicator. She's really cold. She's not building relationships. So, I was in a place where relationship first and then task led second, which is the opposite of what you see in a lot of like more Western cultures. And even though I felt like I was kissing and hugging all these people all the time and getting like endless amounts of coffees and lunches, that feedback took a while to really like progress beyond. And there were definitely times where I was thinking, gosh, well, that's, you want to say, be defensive and be like, oh, well, that can't be true. But it's that person's reality. You just need to embrace that. And so what I actually did is I made that kind of a collective journey. I found a tool at our organization that actually did cultural personality assessments, and I ran that with my team to make it less of a conversation of us against Danielle, and it was more of a collective conversation around cultural kind of components and who was high and low context communicator or who was more hierarchical or flat. And that made it really collective. And it also made the conversation two-way to say that, everyone's got something they're working on. And I really welcome then not just feedback from my leader, but the team collectively. And that really made the journey a bit of a broader one. And it helped me kind of grow and roll.
Great. And Austin.
Sorry, I think my Wi-Fi is a little bit choppy here, but as long as you can still hear me.
Yes.
I would say a shocker of moving to the UK is obviously English to English. I was assuming that business context really well. And something small like humor is a really challenging thing, or even the Super Bowl that just happened. No one from here even made mention of it. So there's little things within what you deem to be really, really important in a cultural context in your market or in your mindset that when you move to another one, you really have to have that AQ to figure out what's going to make sense there, what's going to help you thrive there. I found great success in investing heavily in others more than looking for the people that could help elevate me. I help people. Your unique perspective is part of your IP, which makes you invaluable in life. So carry that with you with a lot of pride and make sure you're building your network as much as you're asking others to help you extend your network, if you will. But I'd say those are two key things.
Danielle, can you just say a quick definition of the high context, low context?
Sure. So when you look at actually kind of cultural indicators, one of them is all around communication. And a high context culture means that the words don't mean their definition. So that's where things mean yes is no and no is no. And so that means that when you're in a high context culture, which can stereotypically be in like Asia or Latam, you need to pay a lot of attention to body language, kind of the broader context, even maybe someone reaction next to the person who's communicating. Whereas low context, which can typically be like more European Western cultures, that the words mean exactly what they say. So if you're in a US environment, I just say, that's not really that great of an idea. Let's explore something else. It's not meant to be offensive. It's just that I'm saying exactly what I mean. Whereas I had to learn in Latam, I'd be like, oh, that could be good. I actually couldn't say no. I had to say yes in a soft way. And I had to really build that up. And I think when you're really working abroad, you don't even need to be living abroad, just working even in multicultural teams, that communication component can be really a priority for everyone to be aware of and just reflect on where you are and where others might be.
Thank you. How did each of you do those things? Because I think it's really hard to start doing these things that are not part of a culture. And it actually reminded me of someone I'd worked with from South America who was a MBA student, and I could see him leaning to kiss people all the time. And a lot of us were like, oh, what's going on? And I watched him over time, stop doing that, which I thought must have been really hard.
I would say I've always said in interviews and stuff like that, my greatest asset and also probably my greatest downside is my curiosity. So you have to try things, and you're going to fail often. You might kiss the wrong person, hopefully not in the wrong place, but I'm sure that gentleman is navigating right his cultural context with the market
Mhm.
that he's in. I remember having the opportunity to work with a Japanese company, and it was eye contact and body language, to Danielle's point, was massive within a really important meeting, and I basically had to upskill myself overnight, picked it up appropriately for what they were looking for from us as the vendor. So I'd say be as curious as you possibly can be. You cannot be over prepared for a
Mhm.
situation, and I think your curiosity also credentializes you in the fact that you're really passionate about understanding the why. So a lot of times, a fact we spoke about, Michelle, for my company, Salesforce. So we have an indicator at 73% of expats fail, and by fail, that means they return back within 2 years or less time. And that's primarily because their curiosity lens is just going too mad all the time, and they can't find that stability. But the stability is part of the growth. It's part of what you're learning,
Mhm.
and it's part of that person you're going to become at the back end of your experience, whether it's an international co-op or whether it's hopefully all of you can land your opportunities as expats.
Thank you.
And I guess I'll just share two things. One is, and I remember I had this discussion a lot when we were going abroad, when I was getting ready for my co-op and my year abroad, is that like manage your expectations. If you're going to that place expecting it to be anything, you're already going to be disappointed. Honestly, you just need to know that you have to embrace nothing but every perception you already have being challenged and finding a way to navigate that in a positive way. So if you're saying, well, this is different and it's not that, it's like, yes, but move it away from the negative context to the opportunity it presents. So that frame of mind and that even internal dialogue about what is happening is so beneficial. And I think that goes back to Austin, just that agility component. You're facing it always in an opportunity lens and not as a, oh, this is really hard. It's like, well, it's hard because I'm growing out of what I was used to. And so that is actually development in progress. And so that's really rewarding. So that's one. And the other thing I was actually going to say is that I think the observation component is so important. And like Austin said, the curiosity, but I would invite you to let people know around you. So, like when I first, for example, got to Sao Paulo or when I first got to Bangalore, I was asking people, what's the appropriate way to greet someone in the morning? What would you want to expect? So that when people saw that I was making an effort, they knew that it wasn't just on accident. Like I was consciously trying to push myself and you're inviting others to give you feedback. But then also pay attention to everything. I lived in Bratislava. That was most recently where I was before the States. And one of the things that was really interesting there, that took a while for me to ask about, but this is just a small nuance. So at lunch, every lunch starts with a soup. And at first, I would watch, is everyone eating the whole soup? Is this just like a four spoonfuls and then you're on to the next? And I would only eat as much as the person next to me. Because I didn't want to overindulge, but I didn't want to underindulge. I didn't know what subtle nuances there were. And then, like 2 months later, I actually finally asked a team member, I was like, hey, can I ask, like, what do you think is best practice for the soup? Like at the beginning of the lunch. And again, that's small, but like just pay attention, mimic behavior as much as possible, because that's probably an indicator of just what best practice is anyway.
Excellent. Anything else about that you want to say about just what it was like to work in a organization where the rules were different, and how did you figure that out?
And while I'm going through that question too, just for a two-way dialogue, curious in the chat if anybody has like, what's your greatest fear about this potential expat future that you're going through? Just because if there's any specific things maybe we can address, it'd be interesting to hear from all of you. Um, in relation to that, so I work for an American company overseas, and I jumped to the conclusion that a lot of, I like what Danielle said earlier, my expectations were I had the skills, I knew the company, and I could just go and deploy those skills in a different market. But selling in a different market, I'm in a sales capacity, is wildly different. In making sure that you understand cultural nuance and you understand the process through within whatever market you're working in. So if I'm going into France, or if I'm going into Belgium, if I'm going into the UK, sure, I might have the same value proposition, but the way that we go about that dialogue is going to change wildly based on just those countries that are, we could pretty much ride a bike through them, right, in a day's time. So they're that close. And for myself as an American, wrapping your head around how different people can be that, again, live within a bike ride of each other, it's pretty wild. And then you go to, well, like going to India, and I hope you speak about that one. Wow, talk about a really, really big change. So yeah, I mean, your best friend is your curiosity, and your probably second co-pilot is going to be your belief in yourself, because that resilience, that grit, if you don't have those things and you're not practicing those by failing often, and if you're still in uni right now, best place to fail. Try, play, and discover, but do it now, because when you get into the real world, it just gets a little bit more. Application for jobs, maybe we'll take that at the back half. But I don't know, Danielle, if do you want to talk about any of those other experiences?
Yeah, I was actually going to add to kind of Austin. So, just for a little bit of context, I was at one company for 11 years and I was abroad 9 of them. And every time I kind of spoke to people in the organization that were trying to go abroad, they were kind of saying the stereotypical places: Zurich, London, really like to get to Australia. There weren't a ton of people trying to go to Bangalore or South Africa. And I would say lean into that. When I applied to my job in Sao Paulo, I was like the only person who wanted to do that. So it made me suddenly a very attractive candidate. I was a really big fish in a small pond. Had I applied for that same job in a London or a Zurich, I probably wouldn't have even been interviewed, just for the sheer level of interest. And so I was able to actually progress quite quickly early in my career because I was taking some bigger jumps, because what they were looking for was not just someone who knew language and culture, but someone who could translate the organization's culture. I was going into a local office where there were a ton of external hires, but there weren't that many people that knew the web to tap into abroad, some of like the broader cultural components of managing the organization. And so don't minimize the value that that can bring. And so really think creatively. If you're just trying to go abroad, that experience is going to be enriching no matter whether you speak the language or not. And really trust that you can just navigate it. It's going to be scary everywhere. Like opening a bank account is challenging. The first day I was in Sao Paulo, it took me 4 hours to order Pizza Hut online because I couldn't figure out like any of the information they needed, as an example, right? So just really think purposefully about what you're doing and challenge your perception of where you might want to go and why. If you're just seeking that growth, I would look at something that might even be a little bit less obvious. It could push your name to the top in a way you may not anticipate.
Very interesting.
Can I add two things to that? So one thing I'll say is I've never got more or outreach for opportunities that are super interesting to me until I made this big leap into this sort of unknown world. Because I think once you are proven as an asset in different cultures and different countries, you become invaluable to companies because companies are global, right? So that when you've proven yourself in a global capacity, especially one that's multilingual, like you are off to the races for how interesting this world and where your life can end up going. On Sophie Farrell, thank you for the comment on. I'll give you an interesting, I guess, book that I found. So Dan Rome is the author. It's called Draw to Win, and he took a position in Russia. And on his team, he was the managing director at the time of a magazine, and he had 8 different people, all of which spoke different languages, and none of which spoke a common language. So in trying to come up as in a creative capacity in this world that he was working, he then started to have them draw their ideas out. And he built a whole business around this, and it's all about whiteboarding and how you communicate by visual art. So that was the way he navigated a language that he never really fully learned. But just lots of different ways to think about language. I love the high context, low context. How did you? Yeah, we got some good questions to keep going through.
Yeah, I see a lot of questions around just like securing visa sponsorship and like how to get put abroad. So one, I would say tap into your network. Obviously, a blind application on LinkedIn or just walking up to like a table at a fair like I did. But if you know someone who's already at an organization that is multicultural, in maybe some of the regions you're trying to get to, try to leverage, have a conversation. I'd say that even got me to move to other regions at my previous organization. So I was in LATAM for 6 years. I had this really great LATAM network, but I didn't know anyone in EMEA, and I really wanted to move to Slovakia. And so I would reach out to people and I would say, hey, I'm really trying to move to EMEA. I've not worked there before. Do you have 1 or 2 people I connect with that might be in some of the XYZ offices? And then you use that to ask for 2 or 3 more names. And actually, by the time I interviewed, I had 5 interviews, and 3 or 4 of the people I'd already met. And so I didn't have to tell them why I was applying and what I was looking for. That stickiness and context was already present. And yes, while that's an internal example, you can take some of those same tactics and apply them to any job hunt. So just really look at your network and ask your network to network you with other individuals, and just chat and share what you want. I think I tell my team this a lot. I think there's a misnomer that you should like hold what you want really closely and not tell anyone. And your career is kind of like a boat in water, and like you need all of the water to lift you up like a wave and move you forward. I pretty much told anyone that would listen that I was trying to get to Brazil. They'd be like, hey, what do you do at this organization? I'm like, I'm trying to move to Brazil. And then finally someone told someone that they heard of a job, and it kind of got to me because they were like, there's this like one US American girl. She's like really trying to move to Sao Paulo. Has anyone asked her about this job? And had I not tried to put as many feelers out as possible, then that job may never have even landed in my inbox as an FYI, do you know this exists? So those would be a couple of my tips when it comes to like trying to secure what you want and where you're going.
How did you develop Austin, I cut you off.
No, sorry. I was going to give you also a data-led approach. If you have LinkedIn Sales Navigator, you can follow companies and you can set leads essentially up if they're hiring. So if you can do it by region, you can do it by capacity, but it's an interesting trend to follow. If you see companies, and for me, CNBC or whatever companies you're interested in, you'll always see where that growth is shifting and moving to within the specific industry that you're interested in. But having that initial touch point of just maybe a LinkedIn push notification to say, hey, this company is hiring in this market might give you a tip to say, oh, maybe I should figure out who the recruiters are and maybe reach out to a few individuals I can see I have mutual connections, knowing that you're on a give side versus being on an ask side. So we always try to lead with some version of value and saying, I did my homework. I know that there's and I think I'd be a great fit. That outreach to me, I do a lot of video outreach on LinkedIn as well, instead of just text. Personalizes it, shows you care. And if it's something you're really passionate about, Danielle, I'd be curious your take on this, but my first question to anyone I'm interviewing or anyone I'm hiring into this market that's not from here is why? And if they can't hit me with basically in less than an elevator pitch, 10 seconds, why this is really important to them, that means that they haven't thought about it enough. And that means a bucket of 72% failure versus the individual, like the passionate American that wants to go to Sao Paulo, that knows what they're doing. And that's the person that's going to have the vigor, have the resilience, have the grit to be really successful. But I don't know, Danielle, if you have a way of navigating the understanding your why.
I would definitely agree. It's always like one of the first questions is like, what do you want from this next role? Like, what are you looking to take away from it? I care less about if you can do it, but if you don't have the understanding on the purpose it's serving for you, then it could be anyone, really. I'll also challenge that with, so I've always been in operations roles, which means I lead teams, I lead large teams. I've led teams up to like sizes of 200. I see a lot of resumes. If I don't see emotional intelligence described and represented heavily, I would not even interview you for an international role. And I say that because when you're abroad, kind of going back, Austin, to what you said about resilience and agility, if you don't have the EQ that you can demonstrate that on your resume, not about just what you can do, but how you can do it. If it's not saying soft skills, transferable skills, then you already, in my mind, are probably not self-aware enough to be able to do that job if you can't translate that into your resume. So I would say already look and see, is your resume calling out some of those things? Because even on my like first bio, it says, that I have demonstrated transferable skills, adaptability, it's talking about all of those things, a lot less on what I've done and how I've achieved it, because that's going to speak to just your success rate.
How did you go about, and we have some questions related to this, how did you go about creating your life outside of work?
Adeline, I love the question there too, because it speaks to personalization. So figuring out how to stand out in the sea and the wild. I mean, you're all at Northeastern or have graduated from there or have a connection to there, which is one of the hardest schools in the world to get into. So you're already a leg up. But continuously finding unique value so that you stand out amongst the masses, the way that I find it to be the easiest is give. Just give back in any way possible. Being here with all of you and having this conversation, if it's on recording or not, find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to do what I can to help you, because that's how we widen our network in new and interesting ways. But I don't know if that did I go out? What was the question? Sorry, I went totally left there.
Building your personal life, Austin. Do you have any
Thank
tips?
you. Thank you. Building personal life. I'm a serial hobbyist, and I think it's an amazing way to sink right into whatever market that you land, using those as ways to build community, whether you are a person that's into sewing or whether you like to go run triathlons and marathon. It doesn't make a difference because you'll find your people. But being curious to things that you may not have had experience with yet, trying new foods is always an amazing part of culture, which I'm sure everyone knows already, but that'd be my way.
Yeah, I've done similar things. So like pretty much I've done every amount of hobby, especially when you're abroad. Every engagement opportunity is an opportunity to meet someone new. And so I've done things I never even thought I would do just to keep myself busy because it would maybe be something that's pretty common local. I got like a diver's license when I lived in Sao Paulo because I was like close to the beach versus I picked up boxing and salsa dancing when I lived in Mexico because that was a bit more of the cultural context. The other thing I'll say is I never said no to an invite. If it was like 10 p.m. and someone was like, hey, I'm going out, even if I was already in my pajamas, I got ready and I went out. And it's only because you never know who that person is going to like connect you to that might be just like a really strong connection. Even if I wasn't thinking that person was like someone that was going to become a really close friend of mine, you just have, you never know what that's going to lead to. And some of my best friends or closest friends came from a person that I met through a person that I met through a dinner party. And had I really just said tonight, I just feel like staying in, I probably would have missed that. You just don't have that benefit. Like every opportunity abroad is an opportunity and you pretty much have to embrace it, even when you feel like, I don't really know if I'm up to it. And that can be a little bit exhausting, but it does need to happen.
Um, Austin, I was thinking about it when we were coming up with a title, you would put the future of work in the title. I was just wondering what you were thinking about, like how that ties into our conversation.
I'm gonna try really hard not to go down the Salesforce Kool-Aid track here, but there's some really interesting stuff going on in the future of work. The digitization of labor as a whole, how artificial intelligence is going to play into all of our lives. I'm going to have agents in the near future that are going to work on our behalf to manage our schedules and diaries and make us more efficient. But at the end of the day, empathy, curiosity, creativity, all will always reside within us, the human side of things. So there's sort of two trends going on, at least within my world, which is like, where is artificial intelligence going to sort of take the forefront and put us into this weird stratosphere of cohabitating with agentic AI, and then where humans always going to have the biggest mission. And I would definitely encourage everyone to stay really curious on the topic, regardless of industry, regardless of where you're getting your degrees in, it's going to play a role in your lives. So there's definitely a way that it's making a bit of a shift into things. But at the end of the day, it's not going to change the foundations, which is sort of the things that Danielle and I are talking about here, and probably what made us successful as people coming out of Northeastern. But I don't know if Danielle, if the insurance industry has any upshifts within AI or how that stuff's playing into your world.
Yeah. Oh, yes. We just did like a full AI training for every level just to say like where do you think you could place this, right? So I would agree with Austin. I feel like it's agnostic to sector. So if you don't have that level of curiosity to be able to just continuously transform, I always tell my team like don't make yourself not relevant. And the only way to do that is to continuously self-reflect and to continuously embrace change, even when you're not going abroad and you're in same role, like you're growing in role because the role itself is always going to be evolving. And so, yeah, I would say Austin, exact same kind of from what I see in the insurance space as well.
Please keep throwing questions that you can think of into the chat. This is a good chance for any topic. I did want to put in the chat also through the Career Design Office, there is an online resource called Going Global that has information and links related to job hunting in multiple countries, like what resumes are like, what some sources of finding job information, what to expect on interviews. So that can be a really good introduction.
Sure everybody's doing this already as well, because everyone at Northeastern is usually ahead of the curve, but your digital footprint is very, very loud to anybody you're going to apply for, speak to, or try to get in as far as a company goes. So clean it up. If you think it can't be found, it probably can be, especially if you're going to apply to our industry and technology. So definitely have a look there. You will make yourself a lot more attractive if you shift or mold your well into the industry or the market that you're trying to get into. And taking that time, I promise you, is worth every calorie that you put in. Everyone does look if you're in a hiring capacity, and every good company is going to scrutinize it pretty heavily. And then I would say, grades are really important, and coming out at successful from school is probably hard for type A people to see beyond, but it's the experience that we care about. So ensuring that that is way bigger than just the amazing degree that you're going to achieve is probably where we find the most success within interviews and bringing people into really interesting positions.
I'll also say, so I get a lot of reach outs. I always have like new roles and people are always like reaching out to me. Anyone who reaches out to me, I automatically tell them, give me a resume. I'll just put it to the top of the stack with HR. I don't know if everyone's going to do that, but I've done that a ton. Sometimes that's just half the battle is like, there's 100 people that applied. The one thing I will do is I'll look at your LinkedIn profile. And if you don't have a strong summary, then I think that that's not as strong. Like I want to elevator speech exactly what you're looking for. If you're just like broad reaching out, it falls a little bit flat. So kind of back to what Austin said, like you should even just put that on your profile. Like, what is it that you're seeking? You know exactly what you're good at. What are those skills? And why do you think they're going to add value, agnostic to organization or sector? So just work and reflect on that, because that should really come through in any interview or any interaction. Just be prepared. You never know when you're going to meet with someone that might be able to help you. Again, like, what's your Sao Paulo? Just put it out there. I'm really trying to get to the UK. Okay, great. Why?
I'm also just having the thought too, because I've worked with international students in the US, which is sometimes putting context to your employers. Like I would talk to someone and they would say, oh, this is the third biggest oil producer in my country. It's like, okay, put that under the company, because things that are known here may not be known even somewhere else in the US, but not internationally. So things that might impress the reader with the significance of the employer that you had, for example, or even that your university may or may not be known in the same way or at all. Danielle, I was curious like what it was like to be a new manager, especially as you were early on in your career, and then in this cultural context, how did you navigate that?
That's a really great question. So pretty early on, I had kind of multicultural teams, not just local, but actually virtual. And so I would say, back to what I shared about making this a collective awareness, I think that is really important to say, hey, this is my style, but having discussions around what do you need? What makes you feel successful? I think that's even agnostic to culture. That's just like leadership at base, is like understanding this is where I am, where are you, and how can I meet you there? But I think it's even more important when you're a leader and you're coming from somewhere else to just show to the team that you care and you're trying. I did learn Portuguese when I lived in Sao Paulo. People were coming to me and always speaking English. And I kind of got to a point where I was like, if you don't come to me speaking Portuguese, I'm just not responding. And at first people thought that was kind of funny, but then eventually like they just only interacted with me in Portuguese, and that really helped. But then in Slovakia, for example, a little bit more of a difficult conversation or difficult language, I could get around, but it was still really important. I got all kinds of feedback that when I showed up and was like, nobody, just the fact that I was trying to eat local, speak locally, and like show care, that lands and it goes really far. I think it can be really a little bit daunting to have a leader that's coming from a culture that's different than yours. You obviously want to impress them. But if you don't feel like they're making an effort to get to know who you are, and each one of us is connected to where we're from in some capacity, it can be really challenging. So as a leader, I think it's the onus is on you to kind of start to bridge that gap and drive that kind of dialogue and demonstrate that very visually to say, hey, I'm here to learn. Like, what does that look like? And try to make sure that there's that human component, because I think that just builds a lot of trust and respect.
One thing that I found definitely spans across culture, language, sort of it's agnostic to any of these things is vulnerability. Brene Brown is brilliant. I don't know if everyone's come
She's
across
great.
her before. Dr. Michael Gervais has an amazing podcast that taps into a lot of this stuff, but it definitely helped people empathize, and having vulnerability and authenticity in your work is something that I would say I didn't carry for the first couple years. I felt like I needed to be something that I really didn't. That level of professionalism and I think pressure that came coming out of such a high performing school like Northeastern pushed me into being a person I thought I needed to be in order to be a successful leader. And I think the more senior I get in my career, the more tenure I get, I realize that it's just the more human I can be that allows me to be the most impactful person. And when you're going to go into the expat world, it's even harder because you have different language and different people, different culture, but people always understand people, regardless. I love, Danielle, your sentiment of trying. Any country I go to, I'll try their local cuisine and I will try
Mhm.
my hardest to say, can I have a beer or may I have a coffee or
Yeah.
thank you, goodbye, good night. These little nuances are what really helps people see you and make sure that they know that you do care and stuff like that. I mean, it sounds simple, but I promise, put the work in to figure it out and put it as part of your sort of like daily muscle of how you show up. And it really does make a big difference.
Sounds like you both were extremely thoughtful and open in these processes of figuring things out and adapting and navigating. And obviously, it's good in any context, but particularly internationally.
The only other thing I'll add is, and especially as you guys are job hunting or as you're looking at opportunities, when you are kind of doing things a little bit differently, you just need to trust your gut and go with it. I had a lot of outward criticism for some of the things I was trying to do and places I was going, even from leaders that I respected at the organization. When I left Sao Paulo, I was married. I had just had my daughter. She was 1, and people were like, "Why would you take your family to India? Like, aren't you scared?" And I was like, "No, I see this as an opportunity. Like, it's a very different culture. I've kind of been in Latam. I'm really trying to push myself. I think there's a lot to be taken from that, but balance that justifying and validation very, very carefully. I got a ton of flack when I left Northeastern. I went to Mexico City. I was on a local hire contract, which meant I was being paid in Mexico, Mexican pesos when it was 20 to the dollar. Even some of my own family was like, you don't even have enough to pay your loans back. Like, what are you doing? And I was trying to play the long game, and not everyone's going to understand that. And so just be really thoughtful when you are kind of deviating from the path. There is going to be a lot of opinions and a lot of very vocal opinions from maybe even people that you really care about and are close to you. And you just need to inherently trust your gut and know that you're doing it for the right reasons. And as long as you have kind of the resilience to push through the challenges, you should be fine, but that's not everyone's space. And so they might really struggle with, how would I do that? And they're projecting that onto you, not saying, why would you do that? Or how are you going to be successful? It says sometimes a lot more about them. So just be really careful, especially early on in your career. You can want to like validate those around you and like really have that approval. And it could steer you into some places that you actually wanted to do things differently.
It's funny because, and I apologize if I'm saying any names wrong, just want to try to personalize to you, but Simran, I was going to use this word to calibrate with Danielle, which is advice. So I learned this one the hard way, but be very weary giving advice and equally be even more weary of receiving it. You definitely want to lean on mentors and lean on people you can trust in your journey. But in the same vein, you know a lot more than you think you do within that gut or that, especially if you have the motivation and you have that sort of mat or flag at the end of the way that you're going for. So How do I feel? How do I avoid feeling discouraged? Like I said, I wanted to go to London since I was based enough to understand what going to London as an expat meant. And it took me 9 years and three companies to do it. But the discouragement will only come if what you're trying to achieve is not truly what you want to achieve. I feel like the process of getting failures is maybe just companies not deserving you. That was the way I saw it, is I did my best, I put my best foot forward. That's how I analyzed it. Or maybe if you had a test and you had a poor score, did you put your best foot forward? As long as you come back to that and you know that the opportunity actually wasn't right for you, and the next one will come along. But being resilient, building that grit, having those failures as a part of your story is absolutely what makes you bulletproof when it comes to the point that you're in the interview that you really need to land.
I was curious to ask Danielle about, and maybe Austin, you may have had some of these experiences, but Danielle moved back to the States, to Atlanta, and you talked about
Yeah.
reverse culture shock. Like, what was that like?
Yeah, so a little bit of context. Austin, you said he's at a US company. I was at a Swiss company abroad. So I very much had never really worked in the US, and I didn't have even an American corporate culture. And I'd been in high context culture, so very like indirect communication is and very people forward is what I developed. And after that, I had wanted to come back to the US, and in US insurance is really kind of what steers the global insurance market. So I needed to round that out. And it was really challenging. One, I found American communicators to be aggressive. That might seem really funny, but I was like physically reacting sometimes to very what was like overly direct. And it was kind of funny because my experience came full circle. Like I was that person 10 years earlier. And here I am on the receiving line, like, oh God, this person is like really in my face. Um, and 3 years in, I don't feel as much of that, but that first year was really reverse culture shock, just how to get things done. Also, Austin, back to your like nuances. I'm in a company that only makes like US football references for everything. And I didn't understand what any of that meant. They'd be like, we have to really get on blocking and tackling. And I like pinged my manager and I was like, what are they talking about? Because at a Swiss organization, we definitely weren't talking about like US football references. So I really felt like in some ways I was kind of starting over, and I had to be even that much more curious and ask what seemed to be really low, like basic questions in order to be effective. And so it was an interesting transition for sure.
I don't want to belittle the concept because it's so powerful when you experience reverse culture shock. It's kind of bizarre because you're going home and you're like, what? This doesn't feel like home at all. But I come back to AQ. It's how I think of everything as almost a game. Like when I'm coming back, I have to mumbo jumbo in my head, and then I remember I had to give a best man speech in coming back, and a couple of my friends were like, "Why are you saying mate and cheers and you sound British now?" And I'm like, "Oh shoot, I gotta shift my head and start talking like I'm from Jersey again." So it's a lot of fun to play that game in your mind, but now I see that as such a cool asset that I can step into different markets and I can shift really quickly to my customers, to my company, to my team, whomever it might be. And that's just sort of like proof and trial and error over 10 years time. But super interesting. We didn't ask this at the onset too, but is anybody on this call international and studying at Northeastern, or everybody US? And if you are international, just curious where you might be from. Okay, everyone's US.
Anything else to add about, well, maybe Austin, I'm kind of curious, like, what are you thinking about? Where are things in the future for you? Do you know? Or what are some of your desires based
Oh,
on the experiences?
I'm gonna go on a whim here, and I'm gonna try to pronounce another name poorly. Malcolm. Thank you for that question. Super interesting one, and definitely one I can talk to you for probably an hour about. So the only thing I'll say from an industry perspective is software as a service is absolutely dead. Think of now service as a software. So transformation as a where the world is heading, and LLMs are definitely behind most of it. But I love this question. Maybe get me on LinkedIn and we can continue it. It's a very interesting one.
Anything else to add about advice for people considering this, or anything else you want to say about how you've been changed by the path that you've taken?
The only thing I'll say, and I think Austin touched on this, is like you really need to think about the long game a little bit. I even say this to like my current team, like when you're looking at a role, what is that setting you up for in the role after it? Like just looking at like the jump. And I give my Mexico example as a start. I wasn't at the job that maybe I felt like I could have been at, but I was on the path to adding international experience, which was my priority, let's say, at a company that I felt like was going to open other doors. So you do have to do a little bit of give and take. And sometimes you have to take, we always say in my organization that your career is kind of like a jungle gym. Sometimes you go up, you go down, you go sideways, you go back. And so just mapping it into the bigger picture and being really thoughtful. Sometimes you just have to be patient. Like Austin said, it took him like 10 years to get to London, right? I still have things that I haven't been able to do. I always tell people I'm trying to get to Singapore. Like that's really where I want to go next. But it takes a while. Like I told people for 2 years I wanted to go to Brazil before it happened. I networked for a year before I got to go to Slovakia. Like these are things that take some strategic thought. It's not just overnight. And kind of back to that discouragement, it only feels discouraging if you're not progressing, but even small progress is progress. And so just mapping that out and really understanding what that looks like to you, and not just for the 6 to 12 or 18 months, but the 2 to 3, 4 year mark is really critical, I'd say.
Questions coming in.
Yeah, I'm looking at Nandini's comments here. I'm glad you put the word happy in there. Happy is an interesting one. I like to think every day is going to be a happy day, but I would say the way I think about it is I love a podcast called The Moth, and their slogan and sign off is live a story-worthy week. And I can guarantee you my life when becoming an expat became story worthy every week. Whether it was I can't get a bank account or I can't get a phone or I can't get a flat because of X, Y, and Z or Z if you're from the UK. It's interesting. And that interesting is and lean into the friction of life. That is where you will find the most happy. And it might not be happy every moment, but I think if things are happy every moment, you're probably not pushing hard enough and you're probably not pushing in the right directions. Linear is not the way home. Take every left turn you can possibly take. And if there is no left turn, make one. So, these are some of the things that I would say my education at Northeastern naturally gave to me, but didn't help me operationalize. And building a career as an expat, so you're here for the right reasons. Highly encourage you to continue pursuing that curiosity. And how would you compare your life from the US to London? Everything in the US is bigger. Everything in Europe is tiny. That's the one thing I say. I miss cars. No, it's very different.
I think that leaves me, I always get the question like, what's your favorite place? And I think when you've just done it enough, you just know there is no perfect place. And every place I am, there's something I absolutely love that no other place is going to have. And there's something that's just kind of painful and challenging, but it's different everywhere. And I would say the excellence about it and the really rewarding piece is that you're just constantly seeing things from a new lens. So personally, I know that there are opportunities to go abroad for 3, 6 months or do a short-term assignment. I always knew I really wanted to immerse completely and really be able to experience it from the local lens, if you will, and that takes time. And it is very challenging. And you, again, are just constantly thinking of things in new ways. And that was kind of my definition of happy. It felt really rewarding, even when it was felt a little bit discouraging, but there's so much growth in that. And that's really kind of what I was chasing. And so, there's really no perfect place. I feel like everything is an opportunity, which is kind of the really enriching experience of being abroad.
Question about getting some more internships in London.
Yeah, I can see a couple of these. So, Skylar, I went US to a German company based out of Frankfurt, back to a US company now based in London. I think you're Swiss company.
Hmm. I was at a Swiss company abroad, and I worked in their local offices. So, like, I was a local Brazilian employee with the Sao Paulo firm under a Swiss branch.
And then Jennifer, um, London's really interesting as a local market because of Brexit. So a lot of talent that was originally in the UK with the EU visa has lost that sponsorship. So I'd say opportunities are and it's a great market to look into. As far as differentiating yourself, I don't know what industry or what capacity you're looking to explore. Happy to help you, but I would definitely say within London, you have a strong tech industry, obviously strong finance, really strong insurance. So figure out the industry you're trying to crack into, and then yeah, go deep on basically what's missing and how you fill that gap. Finance, okay. So finance is being upended by technology. I look fintech more than I would look traditional banking. If you're going to try to position yourself there, companies like Revolut, Monzo, these are modern banks that are all virtual. Super interesting, lots of positions. Stripe, Airwallex, I can kind of give you a few, but again, LinkedIn if you want any help.
Yeah, and do check out too that we have global co-op. Like I know someone who did mechanical engineering co-op in Australia. So I think there's a growing number of opportunities if you're still in the co-op phase of things.
I'll also just touch a lot. Not a lot of people know that a lot of global firms have what we call like business solution centers in large cities that are kind of lower cost. So Bratislava, Madrid, Croatia. It can be really easy to get a job there. I'll give you an example. Like all of North and South America support for Dell comes from Bratislava. Amazon, all South America support is sitting in Bratislava. Similar for like Poland and Croatia. So if you speak a second language, if you can bring any type of that, I would definitely be looking at that because you could get into a really great firm. Maybe you don't want to live in Bratislava and Croatia forever, but 2 years is nothing. And then if you have, they'll sponsor you because they need talent very easily. You bring the language component, which is always kind of in a demand, and then you could pretty much get in the door and then try to kind of pivot somewhere else. So again, thinking really broadly, something very similar for like Bangalore, sometimes Malaysia, like you can get into really nice firms in an operations role, just offering something different because they're servicing people globally.
We're wrapping up. I want to thank both of you for sharing your experiences, but you both have brought like a very strong, positive, encouraging approach, whether it's if people decide to go abroad or just for even a bigger picture of choices that we're making. I think your emphasis on kind of being curious and agile and flexible and learning from things and sort of enjoying being uncomfortable or challenged is a really huge life lesson beyond the specifics that we're talking about. Anything else that you want to add in closing?
No, I would just say feel free to reach out. Everyone on this call has 2 new people in their network. Don't feel like this ends here if you guys want to reach out to either one of us. I mean, I think that that's something to lean into.
Thank you both for being so encouraging and very inspiring to hear about your paths and how you figured out how to navigate it. And there's probably something about who you were to begin with that I think set you on these courses to enjoy the ride. But we really appreciate your sharing your experiences and your insights. And thank all of you for coming and asking such good questions.
Yes, thank you for such an interactive session. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.